Do you like candles? We all know that I love candles, and I love the candles from Remy Moon. They are an Australian-based small business and they make the best and most magical candles. All of their candles are made with high vibes, pure intentions, and each one is crafted with a little bit of Reiki healing that also suits the intention of the candle itself. All their candles are non-toxic and vegan, so they don't harm us or the animals. You can use the code Suburban Witch for 15% off all of their products, and it's only for listeners of the Witch Talks podcast. Simply head to remymoon.com.au to get your candles now. Welcome to Witch Talks, the series for spiritual seekers, witches, and enlightened souls. I'm Hana the Suburban Witch, professional tarot reader, astrologer, and witch, and I hope you're ready to get up close and personal with your favourite witches. Hello, welcome back to the Witch Talks podcast. I'm very happy to have you here. My name is Hana O'Neill. I am known as Hana the Suburban Witch, and I am your host for today's episode. Well, all the episodes on this podcast because it is my own. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know that I have 3 upcoming classes. They are roughly 2.5 hours long each and include tons of interaction, including a Q&A at the end too. But here's the catch, there's only 10 spots available per class to attend live. That's because I like to maintain the integrity of each class. I want it to be intimate. I want everyone to get an opportunity to ask questions and have their voices heard. So the next 3 classes that I have coming up are How to Read Tarot, which is just in a couple of days from this podcast episode going out. How to Be Psychic, which will be in May, and in June on the day of the solstice, we have a candle magic class. You can head to suburbanwitchery.com to find out more about each of these now. And let's invite our lovely guest on. This is one of those relevant episodes that if you have listened to my religious trauma episode, if you have listened to the episodes with Rosie Quartz, they're starting to link in, right? This is going to be another religion-based one. Tons of content for you guys if you have a similar story to mine and are still deconstructing, because we need as much help as we can get. In this episode, I'm chatting with Yvonne Aburrow about changing religions. They are a fellow witch and pagan and have an MA in contemporary religions and spiritualities. I'm sure you can guess where this podcast episode is going to go. Yvonne is also an author of many books, and I am excited to pick their brain today. Yvonne is joining us via Zoom all the way from Ontario in Canada. Hey Yvonne, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you on as well. Can we start our chat today by pulling a tarot card? Would you be open to that?
Yes, that would be lovely.
Awesome. Now, are you a cat person or a dog person?
Cat.
Perfect, because I picked this one out in advance. And I was like, I'm going to use the Soul Cats Tarot because it feels right.
I knew I was coming, yeah.
So, pull it out there. It's one of those tarot decks that comes in a ginormous box, but the actual deck is really just a standard size.
It needs to be the same size as the palm of your hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be able to hold it comfortably. And I have small hands, so a lot of decks do not pass that test, unfortunately. Now, do you have a question? You can ask any question you like. It can be general guidance. It can be specific to something in your life. It's totally up to you.
Ooh. How's the book going to go?
All right, let's see. Let's have a little look. So for everyone listening, Yvonne's book, we're recording this just before it gets released, and it will be released a few days before this episode goes live. So let's have a little look for how that's going to go. That is a good card, and I'm going to give a little advice card as well because that can be also good. All right, so the very first card, which is how it's going to go, we have the Ace of Swords. Now, in this card, we have this beautiful, beautiful little, very icy looking kitty cat. I don't know what type that is. Is that Siamese, do you think?
Yeah, it looks like Siamese, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like a Siamese cat.
Yeah.
There's a little symbol of air on its forehead where the third eye for a cat would be, and a little sword hanging from its collar. It is beautiful. It's all sort of icy blues and whites and greys. Now, the aces in the tarot for me, they are the luckiest cards that we have. They are a good thing. They're very rarely going to be a negative card. So this, for me, especially being Ace of Swords, and swords are about the mind and writing, especially, I always associate swords with a pen, right? And words and communication. So for me, this is a really good sign for your book launch, and that it's going to actually give people not only just a new focus for themselves to focus on this new idea and bringing it into being and working through it, but I think it's also going to pivot you a little bit and give you a little bit of a new focus. This whole theme may even grow from here. So I think that's really good. And the advice card, we have the Chariot, and this is
I go, huh? Because I'm a Cancer, and that's Cancer card, right?
It is. Well done. Yes, the astrological ruler for this one is Cancer. And this card, it's really woodsy. It's like this little kitty cat going on this little, what are they called? The paths that they have in Europe.
That's
Cobbled.
like, yeah, but that could represent the book, right?
Yeah. Walking down a path, and you get to choose changing paths. So if you're not listening, if you didn't know, the book is called Changing Paths. And this is, it's a card of direction. It is a card of choice. It is a card of taking back control and getting to choose which direction you go to. And the interesting thing with this one is usually a Chariot card has, the two different sphinxes at the front in the Rider-Waite-Smith at least. And they're kind of going in different directions. Like they kind of, it feels a little bit pulling you in two different directions. This one doesn't have that. It's got the cat pulling the chariot, pulling the little cart facing where the path is going. And there's a little like robin or bird on its back facing the other side. So that's where you get that little two-sided.
Yeah.
So, but it is fantastic. It even matches your background that you've got on this call, this little woodsy.
Yes.
So I think advice-wise, it's definitely about, choosing which direction to go, and then almost like sticking with it, and really just focusing on your will, what your end outcome, what your destination is going to be, and just making sure all roads lead to that for you in terms of like book marketing and things like that. So when you put a post out, be like, all roads lead to the book. So does this relate and push people towards the book? That would be the advice in terms of everything that you're doing marketing wise for it to increase the benefits of your book launch as well. So very good. I love this deck. I really love this deck. It's by
very nice.
Lisa Robertson, and the art was by Adam Olders. And I do have an unboxing on YouTube if anyone wants to see what the cards look like. It's super cute. But let's jump into what we're going to chat today about, which would be your new book, Changing Paths. And I have been desperately awaiting news of the book release, because I did get an advance copy from you, and it is one of those books that I think is going to be a critical resource for many, many people currently and to come. And for me personally, especially with my audience, knowing my own religious history, this is something I've been wanting to recommend to people. Like, this is a great resource. You need to read this book, but it wasn't out and I couldn't do it yet. So now I can. But for you, how does it feel knowing that, at least by the time this podcast comes out, it's going to be out in the world and you can, talk about it and show people, and people are going to be reading it? How does that feel?
Yeah, really great. Because this whole thing came out of my journey and my experiences, and for a long time it was too soon to write about the experiences because they were too raw. And I finally got to a point where I was like, okay, 7 years have now elapsed, and 7 years is really important to me as the time when all the cells in your body have changed, and you can look at literally looking at things with fresh eyes, and so it was really great to just be able to sort of look back on that experience and reflect on it, and just sort of break it down into parts, like bit by bit, so that anybody who is going through that same experience can use the book as a companion on the way. Because I really wished that I'd had somebody to hold my hand who knew what I was going through, and so I thought, well, there must be other people out there who want the same thing. And so I'm really stoked that it's finally going to be there, and I'm really chuffed about the cover. I think it's gorgeous, and I think it's really the color and the tone of a cover can be so important to whether you want to pick the book up off the shelf and find out more about what's in it. And so many pagan books tend to have like a black cover, and the ones that I'm drawn to have a blue or a green cover. As I looked at my bookshelf some time ago and realized, oh my God, I've got so many blue pagan books.
It's a safe color, I think.
Yeah.
Blue and green, they feel safe, they feel trustworthy, they're not too intense. And I think as well, the cover that you've chosen, which is this beautiful like wood background, I would say, it feels not scary, which sometimes this topic, which talks about changing paths, changing religions, changing spiritual beliefs, some people can feel really intimidated by that. So it needed to be something that invited people into a place of, it feels restful and calm and peaceful. And I think that's really necessary for this topic.
Definitely. I mean, green is a nice restful color, and like most people feel like drawn along into the path in the woodland. And also the other thing that was really, really keen to make sure was that it shouldn't be prescribing any one path to anyone, because obviously we've had far too much of that in our lives.
Yep.
And so during the first half of the book, I was quite careful to say, whatever religion you are leaving and whatever religion you're joining, these are the things to look out for. And then the second half is about joining paganism, but in as much of a non-prescriptive way as I could make it.
Yeah, I loved that about the book. So just to give everyone a little bit of background, do you want to tell them, I guess, obviously it's based in your own journey, but how did you get there? How did you get to where you are now? Where did you come from? What's your history with your own religious version of changing paths?
Yeah, so when I grew up in something called the Plymouth Brethren, which is a pretty scary religion, what we call a high control religion. So they want to control every aspect of your life. And my parents thankfully left that when I was 9, and that is why the book is dedicated to them, because without them having taken that step, I think that I would be in a very different spot than I am now. So they left, but then they joined a sort of evangelical church, and then they kind of got bored of that as well. And I joined an evangelical church when I was a teenager, and I mean, it was weird because there were a number of things where I was sort of going, I don't know if I agree with this. Like, I remember not believing in young Earth creationism, and I'm pretty sure I didn't actually believe in the devil.
That's a big part of Christianity.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And a weird thing I realized that I never actually prayed to Jesus. I was always praying to God. I don't know why. It must be some sort of Unitarian tendency. I don't know. Anyway, so when I was a teenager, my best friend came out to me as gay, and I spoke to my evangelical peeps about this, and they were like, oh no, kind of that if he acts on it, he'll go to hell. And it's like, I'd known this guy since he was 5, and I was like, well, he was definitely born that way, and there's not a lot he could do to change it, even if he wanted to. Or and I was like, well, he's wonderful the way he is. He's a wonderful person, and really lovely, caring person. So like, what is the point of a deity that would condemn somebody who is such a beautiful person? And so I chose my friend over Christianity. And there were other factors as well. Like, I'd seen the film Gandhi and thought, hey, there are millions of Hindus out there living a fully devoted religious life. Why would God not accept that?
It's a good question.
Yeah. So I think anyways, I became an atheist for a few years, and then I was kind of looking around for a spirituality, and I'd read Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, and I just found that a really great book. And so when I decided that I was a pagan, I thought I was the only pagan in the world. This is, you got to remember, this is pre-internet, right? So I was sort of, well, yeah, I'm a pagan, but I don't know what to do about it. And then luckily when I was at university, I met other pagans, and the rest is history, as they say. But then, so the thing that actually gave rise to this book was that I hadn't really dealt with my anger and fear about Christianity, so I just kind of buried it at the bottom of my psyche, under a volcano, with a locked box marked "Do not open," and every so often, every time Christianity was mentioned, the volcano would go, and I'd be like, "Bloody Christians!" Right? So clearly, I needed to deal with that, and I did a master's degree in contemporary religions and spiritualities, and I found out all about queer Christians and liberation theology and queer theology and all this cool stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So then I actually had to open the box and deal with the fear, right? And so I did that. And possibly bizarrely, I tried orthodoxy for a bit, which was it was great because it was so different than what I'd grown up with. But it turned out that they were harboring frothing mad homophobes as well, so that was good. Like the actual clergy were fine, but the institution itself was homophobic, and some of the congregation were. So I thought, that's it, I'm running off to join the Unitarians. And so I did that, and they were great. And I did Unitarianism for a few years, but still. And the great thing about Unitarianism, I could be Wiccan and Unitarian at the same time, although some people thought that was weird. Most of the people who thought it was weird were Unitarians. Like Wiccans were like, yeah, whatever. And then after a while, I realized that many people acquire great fulfillment and happiness from practicing two religions, and I decided that wasn't for me, and I had to pick one. And so I picked Wicca, and I harbor great fondness for Unitarianism, but and I'm very thankful for all the healing and affirmation that I got there. But ultimately it wasn't for me. But it's very cool.
Yeah, I've had one other podcast guest who was a Unitarian Universalist, and that was episode 9, 10, or 11, I think. Yeah, that was interesting. We talked about that sort of thing as well. It's actually, I've seen quite a few people who are both Wiccan and Unitarian as well. So I think it's not as uncommon as people might expect to have those two merging together.
Yeah, I mean, it can work for sure. I think it was just when and where we were trying to do this, it didn't quite gel. But
so what year was it when you decided Wicca was your thing?
So that was it was sort of the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. That was the sort of, right, that's it, I'm sticking with Wicca. And and I actually made it. I went to a sumbul, which is like a heathen ritual for which involves drinking and making toasts and oaths and over a sacred mead horn, and I actually made an oath at that ritual. And when you make an oath over a sacred mead horn, you better fulfill it.
And just as a side note for anyone wondering, the episode was on with Leslie J. Linder, and we did talk about that a little bit, as well as a lot of the gender aspects within Wicca, which I believe you also comment on because you do something called inclusive Wicca. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. What's the
Yeah,
difference?
right. So, first of all, I should mention that you have a tradition called inclusive Wicca in Australia,
Oh.
um, which is not the same as the inclusive Wicca small I that I do.
Okay.
So, inclusive Wicca is a tendency within. It's not a tradition on its own. It's a tendency within other forms of Wicca. And the idea is to make Wicca inclusive for LGBT people and disabled people, neurodivergent people, and people of color, so that they're not automatically kind of structurally excluded. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of some of the ideas and a lot of the liturgy can be a bit heterocentric.
Yeah.
And so, and I also felt that making people copy out the Book of Shadows by hand was ableist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was looking to make adjustments to deal with those things.
Mm.
And that was how All Acts of Love and Pleasure Inclusive Wicca was born. And then the two follow-up books, Dark Mirror, The Inner Work of Witchcraft, and The Night Journey, Witchcraft as Transformation, which go into more detail on that, on the anti-oppression and the practices.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think it's definitely necessary, and it's probably going to be an area of Wicca that does grow, I think, as people open their minds a little bit to
Yeah, I
how
mean,
things impact other people that are not always just like them.
yeah, I mean, it's now 9 years since the first book,
Mm.
since All Acts came out, and I think things have changed quite a lot
Mm-hmm.
since then, and people are much more receptive to the ideas. And the other thing that was that I wanted to make it clear that you can be a polytheist and a Wiccan,
Mm-hmm.
an animist and a Wiccan, or even an atheist and a Wiccan, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, definitely.
The number of times I run into people online saying, "Oh no, but you're a Wiccan, you can't be a polytheist." And I'm like, "Well, I am."
Deal with it.
Exactly.
Now, when we talk about your book as we continue through, I'm just going to let you know I'm going to be quoting you a lot because I really, 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 I can't stress how much I resonated with what you wrote. It a lot of the time felt like you had dipped into my brain and taken the words straight out of my mind. Like it was so wonderful to read in that aspect. I was like, oh my goodness, this is not only just resonating, but I mean, I'm sure you'll see as I pull a few pieces out. But you've already mentioned that this book is not just for ex-Christians switching to paganism. It covers so much more than that, and I think that's wonderful. But today we're going to just mainly focus, I guess, on the ex-Christian to paganism stuff because that's where I am and what a lot of my listeners are at the moment. But of course, if you read the book, everyone listening, it covers atheism, any other religion that you are moving from or to. It's inclusive of all of those.
Yeah, and it
So,
also includes oppressive forms of paganism,
yeah,
even, which
yes,
sadly exist. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Now, at one point you said this, so I'm quoting it directly because it's wonderful. People become disenchanted with a spiritual tradition or religious community when its values and beliefs and attitudes come into conflict with their own, when they perceive an internal consistency within those values or beliefs, or when their tradition fails them at an important juncture in life. When a religion preaches compassion and tolerance, but is intolerant and harsh towards a specific group of people, its lived values are in conflict with its professed values, and this often creates a cognitive dissonance for its adherents. I mean, I could marry that paragraph. It sums up the reason people leave so many forms of religion and spirituality so perfectly. My own journey, your own journey, you've already described about your values and the values of the church. I'm reading into your words a little bit more here.
Yeah, sure.
We love everybody, but not if you do that.
Yeah.
Which is so it is. It doesn't work. Your brain sort of goes, hang on a minute, something's not quite right. It's not, the values are not lining up here. And then the part where it doesn't help you through a critical juncture. This is one thing, when I read that, it clicked something in my brain, and it helped me to realize something that I hadn't realized before. And I've been, deconstructing for years now. But during my teens, and most of my listeners will know this, I went through, I had a severe eating disorder, self-harm, depression, anxiety, all of those sorts of things. It was pretty dark for a long time. And I remember going to church, and at church, not only would I feel worse about it, more guilty and more full of shame and more like there was something wrong with me, but they also pray on it. My church in particular was, the sermons would start with, if you are out there, it doesn't matter how broken you are, if you are, you're falling to pieces inside, Jesus still wants you, Jesus needs you to come up today, Jesus. And it felt like it was speaking to me because I did feel that way, right? But it never actually helped me feel any better. And
Yeah.
even when I had one of the youth pastor's girlfriend, who had zero counseling experience whatsoever, became my counselor, and I would have to tell her when things were happening, and she didn't make me feel any better either. And I didn't. It just, the whole thing never worked, and it didn't support me, and it didn't enrich me. It didn't give me explanations. It just made me feel like I was wrong, or it was demons, right? And there was even like I'm not going to get into the little almost exorcism thing that happened. But even after leaving, and we left because my mum was kicked out and I was living with my mum. So it was, you're both not welcome here anymore because my parents split up. So I've gone through all of this horrible mental health stuff, then a massive divorce, which rocked my world, had to change schools due to a lot of bullying. And suddenly it was like, when I need a religion the most, when I need that community I've grown up in and been brought up in, they all turned their backs. And I don't think I ever really dealt with that. I kind of just went looking for another church, and then I'll find a church later, or when it's a little bit more convenient. And I never really realized that the church and the religion were kind of together in my brain as not supporting me, until I read that paragraph from you, and I was like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
that's the important juncture that they didn't support me through. And that's why I've never been able to go back into a church comfortably, and I've never really returned to that. And I lost all that faith that I had. I had so much faith growing up, it was bred into me, and that's where I lost it. And it was just like this wow moment. So it inspired a lot of journaling. It was very, very good.
Delighted to hear that.
So yeah, do you see that blind spot, that particular one, where people may not realize, like, they've left the religion, or have you noticed people not realizing why they left it until much, much later? Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, it does. And I think that there's a whole, I mean, especially in your situation where you were booted before you were ready to boot yourself. I think that there are the surface reasons that one has, and then there's a sort of there's all sorts of underlying stuff going on. I mean, one of the resources that I talk about is Gillian Jenkinson, who's got a book coming out next year. And she talks about how cults actually form a new personality on you. And that's like a fake personality. And then you have to, during the process of deconstructing, you're not just deconstructing the crappy beliefs they've put on you, you're also deconstructing this kind of fake personality that they've grafted onto you as well. Which is this sort of, the personality that that this whole thing of like, I've got to be dependent on Jesus and all this stuff. Like, I mean, it's interesting you brought up the word broken, because if you read like evangelical Christians, or quite a lot of Christians, will talk incessantly about being broken and this and that thing being broken, and I'm just like, I'm not broken, like your response, whatever, whether it was eating disorder or whatever, that is the body. I mean, eating disorders are not a good thing, and like, if people have them, they should get help, but that is your body's way of dealing with something extremely traumatic.
Yes, I had a counselor, a psychologist, when I relapsed with my eating disorder after having my daughter, and I relapsed pretty severely. It was pretty dangerous pretty quickly, and was hospitalized. But the psychologist that I was seeing, I remember she helped me with that same realization, that rewiring of the thought, because she said, your eating disorder is a coping mechanism, and without it, you wouldn't have coped. It was a survival mechanism. How clever and brilliant of you to come up with something that helped you cope through those really, really horrible, hard times. And I was like, what? I've never had someone look at it as anything other than evil and bad. And, it shifted that perspective as, oh, there's not something wrong with me. Whilst it might not be a healthy coping mechanism, I was never taught healthy coping mechanisms. So that's why something like that developed, especially within the church when, in our one, it was charismatic, evangelical Christian. So there was a really big focus on looks and what you wear, and this, as you say, this mask, this personality that you present. And even knowing now that I've got ADHD, which I didn't know back then, and that I'm bi, which I didn't realize was okay back then. I didn't know it was a thing. So I think all of that obviously compiled behind that mask to making me feel as broken as they're telling me I am. So wonderful. And that book you're talking about sounds like a great resource as well for people.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be good. And I mean, another book that I absolutely love is, and I was reminded of it when you said about the exorcism part. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. And it's a novel based on her childhood in a charismatic evangelical home, and she realizes that she realizes she's a lesbian, and you can imagine the fallout. But there's an attempted exorcism, and it was actually made into a TV series in the UK, so it's available on DVD probably still. And it's a book, but there's the one bit where she becomes very ill because of all the bad shit that's happening to her, and there's a tiny orange demon that comes and visits her, and it's really cute. This tiny orange demon, and it's obviously like a part of her psyche or a projection or something, but it's sort of helping her to rebel against her mum and her weird way of looking at the world. It's a great book, highly recommend.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Cool.
I think as well, for me being bi, it didn't compute in my brain for a long time in the worst way possible, because I remember at the church when they were talking about people who were gay, and especially at the time it was mainly a focus on men who were gay. There wasn't much talk about people women who love other women. But it was always obvious.
I realise, that's a possible thing.
And I remember they would talk about things like, you hate the sin, not the sinner. We love everybody, but they just shouldn't do that. And if they act on it, then that's what's wrong. And one thing where they were talking about, trying to just sort of push it down, or I don't know if they were talking about conversion therapy. I'm sure there was some aspect or referencing it. I was probably too young to really understand. But I remember having the thought of, well, if everyone's going to hate you for doing it, why don't you just marry, if you're a man and you think you're gay, this was my thoughts, right? Why not just marry the woman? Because it's fine. Like, I would if I was told that I had to marry a woman, I wouldn't find a problem with that. Why has everyone got such a big problem with having to marry someone of the opposite sex instead of their own? Because I didn't realize that I was attracted to both. So I was like, I don't get the big deal. Just put on a show and marry someone. And I realized later, I was like, oh, not everyone thinks that way, because not everyone is attracted to both. That makes sense now. So that was my childish mind trying to, I guess, come to terms with what they were talking about. Obviously, as an adult now, I understand it a lot better. But
that is adorably bisexual.
Yes. Just do the thing.
That's so cool. I mean, one of the things I think that, when I discovered, paganism, and the first book I read that was after Puckapook's Hill. Actually, the first book I read after Puckapook's Hill was Mists of Avalon, but skipping over that, is the author is problematic. The sort of first non-fiction pagan book that I read was Starhawk's Dream in the Dark, and like Starhawk makes it very, very clear that being gay is completely sacred. And I just love that the idea that, you know, not only is gayness kind of accepted or welcome in paganism, but it's sacred. You know, that put my teeth back in, LGBT people are beloved of the goddess, and, you know, that queerness is sacred, and that's just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was 14, maybe 15, maybe 14, it was before my parents had divorced and before we'd left the church. And my mum she'd been to Bible college, she was in the women's ministries. And I remember, because she worked as an image consultant, which is, you know, helping people with their style and how to dress and colors that suit them, all of that. And she had this client who was trans. They were a transgender woman. And for me, firstly, it was probably the first time I'd heard of that. And secondly, Mum got a lot of backlash from people. Why are you taking on that person as a client? You shouldn't be encouraging, because she was like, well, they want to learn how to dress for their body type. That's what I teach. That's what I do. I'm just helping them dress, you know, if they want to look more feminine, I'll help them look more feminine. And it was eye-opening for me to see my mum start to rebel a little bit and push back and say, you know, well, I've talked to her and she was suicidal until she made this shift. What's better, to have someone still alive and happy, but different to what you want, or to have them kill themselves? And that for me was like yes, I agree, Mum. Yes, why are they saying that's wrong? And it started to put some of those questions in there as well, which, you know, I think is where everything, at least for my mum, I think I should get her on the podcast too. I think it's where it started to all crumble, because for her it was all, as you say, this facade, this mask, this new personality that gets put into place when you join the church. And she joined a lot older. I was, I guess, masked from the beginning and then had to sort of crumble it down from there. But it was wonderful to see her push back and say, no, I believe that what I'm doing is right. I'm helping somebody. And it was such a good example,
And there's an example where her good values were in conflict with the crap values of the church.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. And I don't think, I mean, she was also very hurt by everyone turning their backs on us. So she hasn't really gone back to church since, but I know she still has the belief of God and creator, but it's so different to what we used to believe, if that makes sense. I mean, she comes to me for tarot readings now. She would never have done that.
Great mum.
Yes, she's wonderful. Absolutely. So I do have a question. So the other one, the one where the religion doesn't hold up at a critical juncture. So let's just say, for a hypothetical question, if my witchcraft were to fail me at a critical moment in my life, but I didn't want to leave it, right? What do you recommend for people who may experience those three things that aren't lining up, but they don't actually want to leave the religion? Like, how would people sort of work through that conflict?
Well,
is it possible?
Yes. So for me, like, I actually have a great example for this, and that is that back in the early 2000s, I think since then the community has matured and more people have like formed more connections, more links, and more support networks and stuff like that. And I was having various issues around various things, and one of the things I was having issues with was the sort of heterocentrism of the craft, and I kind of felt like nobody was listening to that, and there were a couple of other things going on as well. But it was really, really hard, because I kind of, when all this fear that evangelical Christianity might be true kind of surfaced from the depths of my psyche, I'm like, I don't want to fit my brain back into that tiny, tiny, narrow box that's their version of reality. That would be horrific. So, like, thankfully I was sufficiently embedded in paganism was embedded in me, and I was embedded in paganism, and even though I was quite cross with paganism about a number of things, I couldn't I couldn't have called myself a Christian because there's just too much vile crap that Christianity has perpetrated. Genocides and pogroms and all of that. And so I didn't know what to call myself. And then I just, it was a case of you can take the person out of Wicca, but you can't take the Wicca out of the person. So yeah, I just couldn't not be a Wiccan. One of the things that I bring up in the book is the notion of miracles. Like paganism generally has magic, but not miracles. And magic, to me the distinction between magic and miracles is that magic works in concert with the laws of physics. So if we send out thought waves or that to help people, send out healing vibes or whatever it is we're doing, that we may not understand, maybe there isn't currently a scientific explanation for what it is we're doing, but one day there will be, because we're not working against the laws of physics. Whereas I think a miracle by definition is against the laws of physics. It's like, the divine hand reaching into reality, rearranging the bits, and it's not a miracle by definition breaks the laws of physics, right? So one of the examples in the book that I came across while I was reading another book for my research was this boy who sadly died because he belonged to a charismatic style church in the US, and they had a faith healer in, and he and his parents were both convinced that he'd been healed of diabetes. They threw his insulin away, and because he believed that the symptoms, he and his parents both believed that the symptoms were gone. Long story short, it took the poor kid 3 days to die. And I think that, that is because those people believed in miracles. If miracles happen, then they happen in concert with, just keep taking the medicine, for crying out loud, tragic and avoidable death. But also whole idea of miracles puts an unbearable strain on accepting the reality of a situation. Because if you're like, all right, my beloved person has some terminal illness, you think that they could be miraculously healed if only you had enough faith, then that puts a horrendous strain on your spirituality and your religion. Whereas if you believe, okay, I have the personal power to send them healing, and but I'm also aware that the cancer or whatever it happens to be is still going to kill them, you've got the best of both worlds. That's like, all right, great, I can send healing, which may or may not work, but also I accept that they have this disease and I'm not going to be able to cure it. Whereas when you have the expectation of miracles, I think it's actually really cruel to give people a hope that can never be fulfilled.
Yeah, and I know many people in Christian cults, I would even call them, that they believe this. I have friends that were in our church and then ended up moving to a much more restrictive style of church, and they're still in that now, and they heavily believe on speaking things into existence, which I mean, I get positive affirmations, all that, but it's to the point of, I speak and it becomes whatever it is, which comes from the Hebrew beginnings of Genesis. I speak and I create, which we see in occult and magical thinking and things like that as well. But they're to that point where it is miracle based, right? And I just know if someone had, I mean, they don't have anyone with diabetes, but if they had believed in a miracle, they would have to show their faith by throwing out that medication. That would be the sign of, we have faith in this. If we don't do that, then we've got doubt in our hearts and it won't be a miracle. And I can almost guarantee that I'm very sympathetic to that poor child, but also the parents. I know that they would then be blaming themselves. We didn't have enough faith, or we doubted. It's our fault. And it is their fault. I mean, but I can see, and I see how it really preys on people. My own grandmother, she was, she was only educated, I think, up until grade 4, maybe, like not very educated. And she was very, very, very hardcore Christian. And my grandfather was a preacher, and she would get up and she would share their testimonies with everyone. And their testimony was about their daughter who had leukemia, and they prayed over her and they got the church to pray over her, and she was miraculously healed. Now, I've done my grandmother's memoir. I have interviewed her. I've pulled everything to pieces. I have no way, like there is nothing that I can see in her story or when she recounts the whole thing that tells me that their daughter, my aunt, actually had leukemia. Like it just, oh, what were the symptoms? How did you know? Oh, when did you go to the doctor? What did they do? I'm asking those sorts of things. And the answers that she was giving was just, she was a bit ill and then she wasn't. And then there was another one where she was miraculously healed of gastro, which, and after 3 days it just stopped. It's like, yeah, that's what gastro does, Nana.
Yes. Well, I mean, the one that got me was there was this thing where there was Christians saying that they were stuck in traffic in New York on the 11th of September 2001, and that God miraculously made the traffic slow down so that they'd be okay.
Because traffic is so rare in New York.
That too, but like, why are you so special?
Yes.
Right? That God was quite happy for the 3,000 people to die in the World Trade Center, but he saved this one evangelical twat bag in traffic. No, I don't think so.
And these stories that are then told, my nana was preaching this to third world countries as they went on their missions trips, right? So I'm like, you believe this and now you're preaching it so other people believe it and come to Jesus, but I feel like they're coming under false pretenses because that didn't actually happen. There was no actual miracle. And it's just this flow-on effect that, almost preys on, and it's not just people without critical thinking or education, because there are many highly educated people who are a part of evangelical Christian churches all over the world. But I think it really preys on insecurity and vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think it's a binary thinking thing, like things are either this or they're that, whereas I think we tend to have a much more kind of nuanced and, rainbow effect kind of approach to things. It's like, well, it could be this, but it could also be that, and it could be that. And I like that about paganism, that it's like, well, maybe I had an encounter with a deity, or maybe it was just a dream. And there's just we allow ourselves that ambivalence, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I'm actually going to quote you again, so I hope you don't mind listening to me parrot your words, but
not at all.
They're beautiful.
It's great, but honestly.
So one thing I love about your writing is it's very straightforward, which I appreciate. I don't know what your Mercury sign is. Do you know what your Mercury sign is?
Not without looking it up.
So I have a Virgo Mercury, which it's an earth sign, and people always tell me that I'm, straight to the point. I don't fluff around. I get in, I speak quite quickly. That is, Mercury's quite fast. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. So that's kind of how I get to the point. I give you information, good at teaching, all those things. And I feel like you might either something like that, because it's just this very grounded, straightforward way of delivering information. I love it. Spoke to my Virgo Mercury. So what you've said is, if you want to evaluate a belief or a concept, one way to do so is to find out how many different religions agree on it. For example, there are numerous religions that believe in reincarnation, and they are not all derived from each other. And there are numerous people from different cultures and traditions who have had flashbacks to their previous lives. So this seems like a reasonable thing to believe in. On the other hand, there is only one religion that believes in a saviour sacrificing himself to save people from his vengeful father, and not all of them interpret it like that. So that does not seem like a particularly reasonable idea, which I just thought was so logical and straightforward and nourishing to read. Now, this works wonders for me, but I also know that a lot of people who are still in the church would rebut this as, the flashbacks to reincarnation, or that's the work of the devil, right? So do you have anything you would suggest for people who want to move past that fear of everything that is other being from the devil? Because I see people that they've left the church, they might be exploring other religions and paganism or witchcraft, touching their feet, but then in their head they keep hearing that's demons whispering in your ear, or that's from the devil wants you to believe that. What do you think people can do to work past that fear?
I think that's a great question. And I think like start with the easy stuff, I remember, like, I'm still like anti Ouija boards, and that I've just and it's because I've never tried them. Maybe I'd be okay if I tried them, but I've just never have. So the first thing is to, like, if you're scared of tarot, right? There are people who are scared of tarot. So get a nice fluffy deck with cats on it. And just look at the cards and read a bit about the history of the tarot, which ironically enough has a large number of Christian symbols in it. And just look at the actual sources of the thing. And there's a great piece by John Beckett on Pathos, and he talks about how he got over those fears. And he basically said that the only way to get past the fear is to immerse yourself in the new worldview. And I think one of the hardest things to do, but extremely worthwhile, is to never argue from within the Christian paradigm. So if someone said, like, for example, I had this really nice, open-minded, liberal evangelical, I was like, wow, liberal evangelicals exist, amazing. Anyway, I had this liberal evangelical neighbor, and he said to me, so how does paganism envisage the concept of or like how does salvation work in paganism? I'm like, well, it doesn't, because we don't have salvation, because we don't believe we need to be saved. So, like, non-question, can't answer that.
Yeah.
And if somebody says to you, well, aren't you afraid you're going to hell? It's like, well, no, because hell doesn't exist. And however tempting it is to argue from and sometimes I still have arguments with people from within the Christian paradigm, just because, and then I have to go, look, from within your paradigm, I'm going to answer that from within your paradigm, and then we're going to answer it from within my paradigm, because just to remind you that I'm not part of your paradigm anymore. And I think that's, but especially when you're starting out on the journey away from whatever fundamentalist tradition it is, you want to try and break out of that mindset, so it doesn't make sense to, like, use arguments from within it. Because it's interesting, I see a lot of atheists online, they seem very, very interested in the doings of the church, and I'm like, well, you seem for somebody who's broken up with the church, you seem oddly obsessed with it.
Yes. Yes, I've seen.
But yeah, I think it's just a case of, if you think of the whole thing as like a what do you call knitwear in Australia? Jumpers, sweaters?
Yes, like a jumper.
A jumper, right? Yeah, because in Canada they're not called jumpers, and it does my head in. Right.
Well, Canada has weird words for things. When I lived there, it took me so long to figure out that a beanie is called a toque, and I think it's the most ridiculous word in the world.
No, I just object to the word sweater because it sounds sweaty. Right. So you've got this jumper and it's all knitted, um and then one thread gets pulled on, and that is the inciting incident that makes you realize that that fundamentalism is wrong, right? So you pull on that thread, and then hopefully the whole thing comes unraveled, and just keep pulling on the threads. Like, pull on the original thread that broke you out of that paradigm, and then find more threads and pull on those too.
What if you had someone you could trust with all of your wildest spiritual questions? Imagine how it would feel to explore your intuition and free your inner witch. Lucky for you, I offer a 30 or 60-minute guidance call one-on-one with me, your host, Hana the Suburban Witch, for all your witchy questions. It's a service done via Zoom as a video call, and you can use your time with me to ask advice about your own personal practice, seek guidance on where you're going with your life, explore your birth chart, discover a career that aligns with your birth chart and your soul's true purpose, uncover answers to your questions with the tarot, and accelerate your psychic development with personalised advice such as the best herbs, crystals, books, or resources to move you forward. Book yours now at suburbanwitchery.com. You've covered a couple of books that you recommend. So aside from your own, which is what I 100% recommend to people, what is your favorite book recommendation specifically for people moving from evangelical, Pentecostal, or fundamentalist Christianity towards paganism, secularism, atheism, or other faiths? Do you have another favorite?
Yeah, so Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, definitely. Also, Godless Morality by Richard Holloway is really, really good. And I also think that, if you want a loving, supportive community, if you're not into paganism, but you want a loving, supportive community to heal that wound that Christianity made, then I would heartily recommend the Unitarians, because they are, or Unitarian Universalists, because they're lovely people, and it's an extremely healing experience from that particular wound. And I think, back to books, I mean, the thing for me was that, when I left Christianity, there weren't any books, right? Because it was in the late 80s. And then the second time around, there were still no books. People online, like, go to the exvangelical hashtag, because there's some awesome stuff in there. Also, the religious trauma hashtag is good. And there's Jo Luhmann is on a tear at the moment. She's doing fantastic stuff about, the white supremacist crap that Christianity is entangled with.
Yes.
I really recommend her, and I hope she writes a book too. And yeah, when Gillian Jenkinson's book comes out, that's going to be really good. Another book that I referred to a lot during the writing was Griffith and Griffith. Let me pull up the title, actually. It should be in further reading, hopefully. Oh, no, it's not in further reading. It's in the bibliography. Hang on.
Well, whilst you look that up, I've got a person on social media that I can recommend for people as well, because I find their stuff really funny and it just speaks to my heart, which is April. What is her full username? April A. Joy.
Oh, neat. I'll come across her. That's very cool.
April A. Joy. Humorously detoxing Christianity.
Yeah.
Ex-conservative. And apparently she has a podcast, evangelical-ish. I might have to check that out as well. But she does little skits. So it's very humorous, which can, I think, for me personally, I think if I had humorous takes on the religion earlier on, it may have made it a little bit easier. It's just a little bit softer. So she might take, someone who's preaching, and she puts it into this skit where it's like, what does she call it? Cringy Christian skits or something, and she acts out what the story that they're telling the pastor on the stage, and it sort of shows you how just ridiculous it is, whatever they're talking about. So it's really funny. So I do recommend her account to anyone going through this journey. Did you find it?
Yeah, it is. So just a quick plug for the backup website for the book, which is changingpathsresources.ca. And I also have a Spotify playlist, so to accompany the book. Anyway, the book is James L. Griffith and Melissa Elliott Griffith, Encountering the Sacred in Psychotherapy, How to Talk with People About Their Spiritual Lives. And that was the book that said about the poor kid with diabetes who died, but also talks about, I mean, it's quite an expensive book. It was kindly lent to me by a friend. So like try and get it from a library or something, but it's really good.
When you're mentioning that the child who died from diabetes, I just also want to mention to everyone listening, it is not just Christianity and Christian people who have that problem of, you know, praying for sickness to go away, believing it does, and not seeking medical attention, because I've seen a big crossover, and I've actually organized an interview which I'll be doing tomorrow, but it probably won't come out for a little bit, with Matthew Remsky, where we're going to talk about the New Age to alt-right pipeline, because it crosses over with a lot of this stuff. So you have these evangelical Christian groups, or very high control Christian groups. Then we have the crunchy community, the parts of the New Age and witchcraft energy healing style community. And there can be that magical thinking again here. Think of people like Joe Dispenza, right, who says that you can meditate your broken back to heal, and all those sorts of things, which, I think meditation is great, but I also think do that alongside all your other normal things. And we've seen stuff like this happen even in our own, pagan community as well. So it's not separate from it, but it is quite common with Christianity also. So I will be doing another episode deeper on that if anyone's interested, which will come up.
That is very true. And I think, about 18 months ago, someone said to me, I said, oh, I've got a headache, I'm going to take an aspirin. Oh, why are you taking an aspirin? Can't you manifest wellness? And I'm like, no, I'm taking the medicine that I need. And by the way, aspirin was discovered by witches.
I was just about to say, did you tell them that it comes from the willowbark tree?
I did. Yes. So yeah, I think we definitely have this problem, because the number of times that people with mental health issues have been told, oh, just put an ounce of cinnamon up your ass, it'll be fine, or go for a walk in the woods. Depression is often caused by chemical imbalance, so you need to get the chemical imbalance. Need to get the chemicals in balance before you can enjoy the walk in the woods.
Exactly. And one other crossover, which kind of leads into when you're talking about inclusive witchcraft and Wicca, one other thing that I often notice is when we have very womb-centered, sometimes very turfy areas of witchcraft and Wicca. There is a critical book review that I did on my website of one book in particular, because it's talking about blood magic and, connecting with your menstrual cycle. That's great. People who menstruate want to connect with their menstrual cycle a lot of the time. Wonderful, bring it into magical practice. But in that book, they then quoted Christiane Northrup quite a lot, who is very, very, very problematic, and goes into that white supremacy, anti-Semitic type of diatribe. And it's just this really slippery little pathway, just like the sort of faith healing pathway. They just they slip in and they all kind of congregate. And it's just really, because you said before the white supremacy aspect in Christianity, and then we get it, slipping in through this shamanic witchcraft side. And it's
Mm.
very disturbing to watch. And if you're not looking for it and if you're not aware of it, you can fall down that slope pretty quickly too.
Yeah, and I also recommend reading Amy Hale's checklist of you know, how to tell how to it's called the Pagan and Occult Fascist Connection and How to Fix It.
Oh, I might have to get that. That's a book?
It's an article on Medium, and again, it's in the bibliography.
Yep.
So, but yeah, Amy talks through like, okay, here are all the things in paganism that tend to be problematic, and
Yeah.
they're linked with the alt-right, and how we should fix that.
Mm.
And she's got like a list of questions to ask yourself, to like journal prompts to work through and go, okay, so that's really helpful.
That's great. I will put the link to your website that has all the resources in the description box for anyone who's wanting to go on, search through those, find those links, listen to the playlist as well. I think that's wonderful. And my last question for you today, what has been the most helpful thing that you've done to come to terms with these, as you put it, simmering volcano of anger at Christianity?
Right. Let it blow.
Mhm.
So yeah, like I had to get to the underlying causes, to kind of figure out, okay, what is it that I need to do to get past the stuff that's in the locked box marked do not open.
Mhm.
And so, you really have to confront that fear head on, and use all the means at your disposal, which means like reason and feelings, and just, I think, immersing yourself in a different worldview, whether that's paganism or something else. Just going through a root and branch examination of why fundamentalist Christianity is wrong,
Mhm.
fundamentalist whatever it is wrong, and like those things you were taught about LGBT people and the position of women, and who's going to the idea that a certain group might be going to hell or whatever it is. You've got to kind of confront that head on, and just kind of headbutt your way out. And I think the advice from John Beckett that you need to really immerse yourself in pagan practice or another spiritual practice, because one of the things that I've noticed about atheists are so adamant that all spiritual stuff is completely wrong and that it's completely irrational and blah blah blah, right? And I think that's their way of going, I'm going to immerse myself in my new worldview, and I'm going to draw a hard bright line between me and my fundamentalist past. And we need to kind of do the same, but immersing ourselves into that other pagan or other worldview, so that you've got something positive to latch onto, really.
Mm.
So one of the metaphors I like to use about life in general is the idea that being an individual in society is like being a fish in the deeps of the ocean. So obviously, that when you're in the deeps of the ocean, there's a lot of external pressure. So the internal pressure of the fish has to be equal to the external pressure of the ocean, because otherwise the fish is going to implode. And so whatever the environment we find ourselves in, our internal pressure has to be equal to the environment so that we can function.
It must equalize.
Yeah. And also I think if you take that fish out of the depths of the ocean, it would probably explode, but I don't really I don't know, that breaks the metaphor. So
Yeah.
but I think it's like I mean, I always feel for people who live in places that are really heavily Christian,
Mm.
So one of my ambitions in life is to go to a country that's never had Christianity as the dominant religion.
Are there many of those left?
Well, I mean, I guess India springs to
Yes.
mind.
Yes.
And like,
Although, I mean,
obviously there is Christianity in India, but it's never been the dominant religion for any great length of time.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
so I
my grandparents did lots of mission trips there, and I remember even when we visited, my husband and I went to India, and I just didn't expect to see or to meet people who were Christian, and it really surprised me because we did, and that was in the south. I'm not sure about the north being less so, but yeah, it's interesting. But it's not a dominant. It's not something you see everywhere. That's for sure.
yeah. I mean, like here, you can't move without falling over a church,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. And here we've got people on corners everywhere preaching with a megaphone.
Yeah, thankfully that's quite rare in Canada now, which is good.
I never really saw it much in my home state down south in Victoria, like maybe in the city, but I'm shocked how many times I've seen it up here in Queensland.
Wow.
But I mean, we often see Queenslanders, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone, as a little bit backwoods. I would say if anywhere, it's going to be similar to like a Bible Belty section of the US is kind of how this state feels. Not always, but in some sections definitely. So yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and your
Pleasure.
energy today. What is the best place that people can go to? I'll obviously put that link in there, but best place for people to find you if they want to follow along with you or get in touch with you or anything like that.
Yeah, so I have a website, YvonneAburrow.com, and that hopefully has links to all the things. I'm not one of those clever people like you who have the same handle on all the social media, but you can usually find me by searching for me. And my handle on Instagram is Yvonne_Aburrow, and I stopped being on Twitter, but you can find me on Mastodon. Where else can you find me? Substack. I have a Substack. And yeah, Instagram, and I'm not on Facebook anymore, which was super for my mental health, I can tell you. I have 2 WordPress blogs because one wasn't enough. I have Dowsing for Divinity, which is the pagan theology one, and then Changing Paths resources.ca for this book. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Really?
I'll put all those links in the description box below, along with links for my own website as well. So as everyone may or may not be aware, I do have 3 classes coming up. So there's one in April, May and June. Those are the ones I've booked in for this year. So if anyone wants to attend one of my classes, they have limited live spots, only 10 live spots available, but there are replays that you can purchase as well. So head on over to suburbanwitchery.com. You can also book a guidance call with me there to have your cards read, or I can jump into your birth chart. We can talk all things witchcraft. It'll be fun. And as Yvonne said, you can find me as Suburban Witchery on pretty much all social media platforms. Those links will be below as well. So make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Join us on our Witch Talks podcast specific Instagram if you would like. It's simply at Witch Talks Podcast. And I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are in the world today. Thank you very much for listening.